Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today I'm going to be covering this book, Soul Among Lions, the Cougar as Peaceful Adversary. This book is written by Harley Shaw, which doesn't mean much immediately, but a lot of the books I'm considering discussing on this channel reference Harley Shaw. He seems to be a very important figure in mountain lion conservation, especially in the New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, Four Corners region of the United States. I purchased this book for $8. It is copyright 1994, and this is at least a 2000 edition. Now, as you can see from the front cover, there is some wear and tear on this book, which is to be expected. It is a used book. And lastly, I do want to say, if I look sweaty or out of sorts, it is because it's 100 degrees in my apartment and my swamp cooler broke. So it's as warm inside my apartment as it is outside. Not a very good environment for anything, really, except for losing water weight in the evening. Now, one thing about this book is the foreword, which I think is a good place to start, not just because the book starts there, but because it does reference a moment that I think another book has referenced as well. So, the first part is that the foreword mentions one could not have picked a better place for the third mountain lion workshop than Prescott, Arizona. The town not only sprawls over some of the West's most famous lion country, but like America's biggest cat, Prescott's transition into the 80s has been an uneasy one. For 3 days in December, biologists and wildlife managers from 10 states and 2 Canadian provinces presented their research, summarized what they knew about the lion's status, and pondered the animal's future. Ranchers, hunters, naturalists, predator control agents, and government administrators were among the almost 200 people in attendance. It seemed that anyone who had ever touched a mountain lion was there, along with more than a few who never had and never would. One of those who had was Harley Shaw. It was he who had organized the symposium. Harley did not give a paper, preferring instead to facilitate the proceedings and listen to the accomplishments of others. Not that Harley did not have much to say, he knows as much about lions as anyone. It's just that he knows too much to tell it all at one sitting. Harley conducted not one, but 2 lion research studies in Arizona, on the Spider and Cross U ranches northwest of Prescott and on the Kaibab Plateau. More recently, he and his crews completed a statewide lion survey that not only studied each major lion habitat, but also looked at such far-flung lion haunts as the Sand Tank Mountains on the Barry Goldwater Gunnery Range and Mount Trumbull on the Arizona Strip. He has been living and thinking mountain lions for almost 20 years. Lions are his passion. To write a book about his lion experiences is as natural for Harley as it was for Hemingway to write about Spain. There is, for some reason, an introduction, a foreword, and a preface in this book. Let me read this out. There is an introduction to the new paper-bound edition, followed by a foreword, followed by a preface, followed by acknowledgments, followed by introduction, all before you get to Section 1, the Cougar component. This book isn't long, it's only about 140 pages. This book, unlike a lot of those with narrative, is more about the facts. So the Cougar component, the Section 1, it's in first person, so it is still a memoir, but it's not a scientific review or a more professional memoir. In this first page, he discusses hunting mountain lions not to shoot and kill, but to radio collar. When Norm arrived, I relinquished the shade to him and began to push my way into the thicket. Norm held Moonshine with a short leash. I had to force my way through the brush, pulling branches apart as I searched the ground ahead of me. expecting to see the shed radio collar at any moment. I had ruled out the possibility of a dead lion. There was no smell. In this heat, the stench of a 9-day-old carcass should be permeating the canyon. Instead, what they found was a mountain lion that hadn't shed her collar, but a mountain lion that had given birth to kittens and had been mostly stationary for 9 days. So, for example, on page 22, he says, under natural conditions, however, lions, or at least female lions, seem to be extremely tenacious within their range. Our first lion marked on the Spider Ranch was a mature female of at least 3 years of age when initially captured in November 1971. We radio tracked her and recaptured her periodically through the spring of 1976. She stayed within the same 50-odd square miles during this entire period and produced 3 litters. She was finally killed by hunters during the spring of '81, still well within the known area of use. Males may be equally tenacious, although as mentioned, limited evidence suggests that they can be displaced by prime males as they grow older. Such older displaced lions may once again become a part of the transient population. This could explain the periodic catch of old lions in areas that are heavily hunted. And then at the end of the chapter, to this point I've written mainly about the biology of the lion, its birth and progress to adulthood. If the lion were the only component in the concept of cougar, we could wrap up the book with a few more biological details. The lion, while perhaps physically difficult to study, is actually a relatively simple beast in its lifestyle. But its lifestyle conflicts with some human lifestyles, and this in turn creates conflict in the human population as a whole, for not everyone agrees on how to deal with the lion. In fact, the lion, along with a few other large carnivores, has become a symbol of the contentiousness that surrounds dwindling wildlands and wild species on our planet. Few symbols will more rapidly disclose the basic philosophical differences in people. So let us turn for a while to the human elements in the concept of cougar. Now in the table of contents, I can read to you right now that chapters 4 through 10 are the human element. Chapters 11 through 14 are section 3, a blending of viewpoints, and section 4, chapters 15, 16, and 17 are titled The Future. So some of this section, the human section, involves him describing guides and cougar hunters, as well as his own participation on a hunt, one where he was hunting to see that experience through that lens, and another where he was hiring a hunter to not kill but to radio collar. So various aspects of the guiding and hunting world, but also additional perspectives. So chapter 9, where he discusses deer hunters and ranchers, he says 2 groups have historically been anti-lion: ranchers and deer hunters. Their motivation is the protection of ungulates that they want for themselves. The rancher has led the fight against predators in the West. Deer hunters, as a separate group, have not held the strong feelings of enmity towards predators characteristic of ranchers, but have either supported lion control or been passive when it occurred. The rancher alone is in a position to have his livelihood affected by lions and has traditionally sought government aid for predator control. For a non-rancher, the relationship of the rancher to predators is hard to understand. He seems to be in the position of a person who parked his car on a railroad crossing, then sued the railroad company for the vehicle's destruction. The predators were there first. The ranchers knew they were there and would cause trouble. Involved here is a basic life philosophy, that of drastically modifying the world for the sake of a few individuals that many find hard to understand. We question whether this planet exists to serve the human species alone. In the case of the rancher, this becomes even harder to accept, for his very lifestyle bespeaks freedom and independence. He usually flaunts his disdain for big government, but he grazes public land and he asks for control of predators on those lands. More recently, some ranchers led the so-called Sagebrush Rebellion in an effort to convert the public domain of the West to state or private lands. In so doing, they hoped to gain more control of grazing levels and of predators. Of course, Land outside the public domain is in danger of subdivision. Thus, in many ways, the rancher often seems to threaten the very wildness that makes the West unique. So, he's not necessarily anti-rancher as he's describing this. And I think in the book, it really makes it clear he's not anti-rancher, but he's very pro-lion. As he says on the next page, our research on Spider Ranch demonstrated that the rancher's problem with lions is, in places, very real. Lions eat cattle and sheep in appreciable numbers at times. Control, efforts at eradication, historically has been the most direct, although not necessarily the simplest or cheapest means of dealing with the lions. In recent years, ranchers have fallen into disrepute because of their impact on wolves, coyotes, and grizzly bears. We must take care, however, in judging those past acts in the light of our times, and perhaps the rancher needs to not judge modern environmentalists in the light of those times to which he clings. So, he is very dedicated to the soul of the West. Harley Shaw is very dedicated to lions, and perhaps more so their place in that idea of the free and wild West. That those wilderness places are needed, but that lions do need some control because they do affect ranchers, and ranchers, like it or not, are a part of that soul of the West. So it's a very interesting discussion on it, but he also discusses preservationists. For example, on page 75, as a biologist, I applaud the preservationists' conservatism in wildlife management. We must, as the human species takes more space on the planet, approach exploitation of any fellow species with due caution and concern for its continued existence. We must also question our relationship with other species. Overconfidence that the Earth was designed for the sole benefit of humans is perhaps our greatest weakness. However, as a professional working with all human elements interested in wildlife, I have found the absolute moral self-righteousness of some of the more extreme preservationists to be annoying. I feel that they at times obstruct even positive efforts in understanding other species. Efforts a few years back by one of the more radical preservationist groups to eliminate the Pittman-Robertson program in wildlife research is an example. This program, supported by taxes on arms and ammunitions, has supported virtually all of the research on huntable wildlife in our country over the past 50 years. Those opposing it contended that it studied animals for the benefit of the hunter, therefore it should be eliminated. They made no effort to create similar funds to study non-game species. He really, in that chapter, discusses the good and bad of preservationists and conservationists, while also in previous chapters discussing the good and bad of ranchers and of deer hunters. So he's looking at this from a very broad perspective, a very wide lens, and I think within the short span of this book, like I said, only 140 pages, he really gets to the heart of a lot of these issues while making it understandable to someone from an outside perspective. In that regard, Harley Shaw is an amazing and brilliant writer, and it does not surprise me at all, thinking about it now, that Harley Shaw is referenced by so many other authors within this space. And I'm thinking of Dexter K. Oliver, who wrote Tracks in the Sand, which I have a copy of down below, or Mountain Lion, which I have a copy of right here, written by Chris Bolgiano, and who spends a good portion of his time mentioning Harley Shaw and Harley Shaw's efforts. The book Mountain Lion that I just discussed is even contemporary with Soul Among Lions. That one was published in 1995 and got a paperback release in 2001, both instances a year after Soul Among Lions. And so these are very contemporary authors and writers and researchers and biologists writing about their own contemporaries, but they are coming from an educated background and educated perspective. And so in that way, I really appreciate what this book has to offer, because it is always something important for anyone interested in conservation. So yeah, Those are my thoughts on Soul Among Lions. This copy, like I said, it's got some wear and tear on the cover. It was purchased for $8, and I think it was worth that money spent. It's a very interesting book, and I think if anyone is interested in a short entry into mountain lions, this one, though it is nearly 30 years old at the time of publication of this video, it is still very relevant and helpful to anyone trying to learn about mountain lions in the modern era. So, Harley Shaw's Soul Among Lions, The Cougar as Peaceful Adversary is a really good book, and I hope you take time to read it. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.